Thank you, Mr. Owen, and I'd like to record my appreciation to the member for Liverpool Riverside for the work of her committee in producing this report and the opportunity for us to debate this afternoon this issue of vital importance, not to our railways alone, but to our economy and indeed our environment. The report identifies 9 priorities for rail investment in Control Period 5 from 2014 to 2019, and I'd like to address 3 of these in particular. Rolling stock, to address capacity constraints, electrification, and also operational strategy such as new signalling technology. I don't expect the Minister to make my constituents alone a national priority, but in the interests of my constituents, that I make no apology for pursuing, these interests ably illustrate the merit of these proposals more widely to the rest of the country. First, though, I'd like to make a general point that any debate about major infrastructural investment decisions needs to take a long-term strategic view and should also include all parts of the supply chain for the industry. It is a concern that no such long-term strategy exists across the whole industry. We do not want to risk directing public funds to the wrong projects or indeed to poorly timed projects in an uncoordinated way, since it is costly and inefficient to stop and start again. Nor is it a good idea to subject major transport investment schemes to the vagaries of political and even economic cycles. A new planning framework extending beyond the government and the Office of Rail Regulation's current 5-year planning process, setting out a clear vision for investment covering a period of as much as 25 years, would go a long way to combating this short-termism. Longer franchises, too, are a necessary component, in my view, of longer-term planning. As a result, suppliers could invest with more confidence, particularly in the arena of technological innovation. The lack of a long-term strategy currently makes it difficult to research and develop the technologies which ultimately save travellers' time and taxpayers' money. The committee identified the Manchester hub as a top priority for Control Period 5, and whilst I wouldn't wish to detract from their observations, I would argue that a similar logic applies to the Bristol and its travel to work area. Bristol is the biggest city outside London in the south of England and the 8th largest in the United Kingdom. From a commuter perspective, on Brunel's railway, Bristol looks like an attractive proposition, which it is, as long as you don't mind how full or how late your train to work could turn out to be. Network Rail's Great Western Route Utilisation Strategy, published a month after the Transport Committee's report, identifies Bristol's rail capacity at peak times, and indeed the performance there, as key gaps which will be in need of attention and investment during Control Period 5. Bristol Temple Meads in particular is a pinch point on the network, and passenger numbers are projected to grow by 37% by 2019. This will result in passenger delays, already amongst the worst on the network, also increasing by more than a third. The route utilisation strategy isolates several key regional services which are suffering severe overcrowding and which investment in extra carriages will reap significant benefits for capacity and connectivity. For example, 5 extra vehicles on the Cardiff to Portsmouth line, which passes through Bradford-on-Avon in my constituency, would enable 2 extra services every morning peak and 3 extra services each evening. Just 1 or 2 carriages from the humble 153 class allocated to the Trans-Wilts line would also reduce the number of passengers in congested Bath because they only want to get across Wiltshire. Further electrification of our national rail network is certainly to be welcomed. Electric trains are cheaper, faster, greener and more reliable than diesel counterparts. They transport a greater number of passengers, and since they are lighter and cause less infrastructural wear and tear, their operating cost is roughly half that of their diesel equivalents. Now, the Great Western Main Line, which clearly is not anticipating the benefits of High Speed 2, has, I would argue, one of the strongest cases for electrification. And I welcome the Transport Secretary's announcement before Christmas that the line from Paddington would be electrified as far as Didcot, Oxford and Newbury. Now, I understand the need to make decisions about powering future intercity services which have delayed decisions about the rest of this line. However, I would ask the government now to bring forward its proposals for further electrification of the line to give the rail industry, businesses and passengers alike the certainty they need to plan for the future. And I'll make two specific further points on this. Firstly, I would ask the Minister directly that electrification should not just take the line to Bristol Parkway, but also the line through Chippenham and Bath to Bristol Temple Meads. Secondly, I would suggest to the Minister the benefits of planned electrification to Newbury extending as far as Westbury. Westbury is not only a more logical staging post on the network on the line from Reading, but also a useful interchange for many journeys, and was identified by Network Rail as an area which will need investment in the next funding period. Onto the subject of operational strategy. One of the investment priorities which hasn't subsequently received as much attention as these other debates was the opportunity provided by new signalling technologies. I believe this is unfortunate, since smart signalling technologies have the potential to secure serious improvements in efficiency, environmental performance, and extra capacity within any given infrastructure. Invensys Rail, headquartered in Chippenham in my constituency, is an internationally renowned company at the forefront of developing control and communications technology. Take, for example, the potential environmental wins of smart signalling. The European Rail Traffic Management System, which Invensys is helping to implement, can help make possible a 46% reduction in carbon emissions from the rail transport by 2030. This system creates wireless connections between trains and control centres, a real step change in the infrastructure we have on our railways. Links which can be used to measure energy use and to send instructions to trains to reduce their consumption wherever possible. However, this requires embedding in both rolling stock and trackside infrastructure. So it does require some joined up organisation and certainly long-term investment. To take greatest advantage of this technology, we need to develop a more strategic view of the whole rail supply chain. But I do believe we are at a good time to begin this process. The McNulty Value for Money study is nearing completion, and the Transport Secretary is establishing this high-level group to further examine the railway's future. I would suggest that firms like Invensys have an important role to play in advising policymakers on the potential of new technology. They're not just a shop window from which we can pluck impressive bits of kit. Their technology has been developed in response to the needs of rail systems around the world, and as a result, they have accumulated expertise which can make a valuable contribution to discussion of the future of the UK network. I was very pleased that the Minister of State accepted my recent invitation to visit Chippenham to see for herself the innovations Invensys are spearheading, and I look forward to welcoming her to Wiltshire in due course. Amongst the investment priorities identified by the Transport Committee's report, there are several examples of low-hanging fruit, good value, small-scale projects which do not require the major infrastructural development of high-speed rail or the complexity of fixing regional bottlenecks. And in this respect, the report echoed Eddington's findings that smaller-scale transport interventions are often the most cost-effective solutions, and acknowledged there are many small but growing communities around the country who could reap substantial benefits from better access to the rail network. I wholeheartedly agree with this principle, since there are two very good examples of it in my own constituency, in the towns of Melksham and Corsham. Mr. Owen, I've already made several appeals in Parliament on behalf of the campaign for an improved service on the Trans-Wilts line, which runs from Swindon to Salisbury via Chippenham, Melksham and Trowbridge. And members can find out more about it on the transwilts.org.uk website organised by the Community Rail Partnership. Melksham is the fourth largest town in Wiltshire by population, yet its rail service is derisory. Just 2 trains a day at times which are frankly useless for residents hoping to commute via train. The Trans-Wilts was a well-used line until the start of the current Great Western franchise in 2006, when the previous government dropped the requirement to provide a decent service on that route. As I pointed out to the Secretary of State when he announced 650 carriages for the network back in November, just one extra carriage allocated to this line could provide more services at economically meaningful times of the day, connecting the county's population centres, whilst at the same time alleviating pressure on commuter lines in the Bristol area. There is strong demand for this service, with the support of the local business community, Wiltshire Council and other local members of Parliament, all coordinated by the excellent campaign group, the Trans-Wilts Community Rail Partnership. Indeed, just in recent weeks, 1,500 people have completed a survey on that website, and a further 150 businesses have done so, setting out how they would use a better service on this line. We have received some encouraging signs in the correspondence I've had with the Minister from the Department on the Trans-Wilts campaign, and I take this opportunity once more to ask her to examine closely the benefits that could accrue from locally driven initiatives like this. And colleagues understand, being forgiving, I'm sure, of me going at some length to make the case for my constituents, might want to consider this, I would call it for them, the Melksham Challenge, to identify a settlement larger than Melksham's more than 20,000 people that currently has an open station and existing passenger rail service as poor as our 2 services each way per day. I really do believe it is an exceptional case. Happily.
I'm very sorry to disappoint him, but the town of Denton, which I have the privilege of representing, has a population of 32,000, has an open station, and has 1 train a week in one direction only.
We have a winner.
Well, I stand corrected, and I hope he will appreciate the opportunity I've given to him to make the case on behalf of his constituents. I would argue that neither Denton nor Melksham deserve to be left with this plight any longer. I know other members will want to come in, so I will move to my concluding remarks, Mr. Owen. I've tried to use examples which are local to my constituents to illustrate a few national discussion points about the future direction of rail investment. Each region, each area, each sector of the industry, indeed each different government, have all had their own priorities for where we should go next. But we are talking about substantial investment commitments which will far outlast this Parliament, perhaps indeed any of our political careers, and indeed the current economic cycle. Rail planning has too often been characterised by short-termism and lack of strategic vision. The coalition government's stated belief is that a modern transport infrastructure is essential for a dynamic and entrepreneurial economy, and states that we need to make the transport sector greener and more sustainable. Mr. Owen, I couldn't agree more, and I don't honestly think that any members here today would depart substantially from that view. It is certainly consistent with the Transport Committee report, which is the basis for our debate today. The challenge for us now is to take that long-term strategic view, to interact with all players in the rail supply chain, to engage with businesses and communities who use the railways, and to align our objectives for rail planning with wider economic and environmental aims. Thank you.
Tom Harris.